All right, well, welcome back. Thank you for continuing on with these lessons. I'm hoping I'm keeping you on the edge of your seat here and explaining these things as well. I'm not much on the excitement portion of things because I want you to be able to focus on what's happening internally and being able to take an internal perspective. There is a time for excitement, there's a time for fun, but this one's kind of just a little bit different. Hope you enjoyed that exercise. I wanted you to do that before we looked at this layering model because I wanted you to have a little idea of how things already affect you. Um, so a little bit about this layering model here. This is a diagram to help explain external influences, our belief system, our identity, our place in time, maybe how we're wired or focused for success or for failure. And then how does this all affect our mood and vice versa, and our core of who we are. All of these things we're kind of going to talk about, kind of scratch the surface anyway, of how these are related and how it affects our mood. Because honestly, I mean, this is actually of course, about happiness. We all have a desire to be happy. I don't think there's anyone out there in the world who doesn't want to be happy. What keeps us from it? These external influences and our response to these external influences. Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify that, but that is what happens. And this layering model will help you identify, or as I explain this, it'll help you identify different things within your own life that you can go, oh wow, I do that. I didn't realize that. You know, kind of start having these little aha moments as we're on this new journey here. So with that, let's take a look at this layering model. Uh, there we go. So first of all, the outside with the red arrows, those are external influences. And I've got that done in black, as you can see right here. Those are external influences. Those are outside pressures pushing in on us. Now, why did I do that in black? Because I'm using that darkness and I'm using the internal as white, because that's our internal desires of who we are. And a lot of times these are in conflict. Now, an external influence doesn't always have to be negative. You can have a positive external influence just as easy as you can have a negative external influence. The difference is knowing which is which and being able to identify those types of things. And that's what we'll look at here as we go through these. Now, the first one is envy, desire, influence, and programming. Those layers are used to steer us and guide us through society, many times in a negative way. Well, let's look at envy. You know, envy is wanting what somebody else has. Now, from a scriptural perspective, like I said, I'm eventually going to get there. That is talking about covetousness. We want what somebody else has. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No, not really. But when it becomes an obsession or becomes part of your identity, then it may be creeping into the negative area. You know, I could feel less than because I don't have what this other person has. And that can be part of that envy. So how does envy play a role in external influences? Well, envy can be created in you through advertising. We see in our media day in and day out, you know, you got to have this new car or this new gadget or this new thing in order to be somebody. So that creation of that envy or that trigger, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the next layers, helps create who you are or who you're not, depending on what the message is. We have to look at the message as well as what is being created, because the next thing is desire. Desires can be created in you, and not all desires are negative. Okay, so the desire to want to finish your education, is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, no. because we want knowledge. But what if you can't finish your education or you haven't achieved that goal? How does that affect who you are? So can poor desires or poor choices about what we achieve as desires be in conflict with who we are or who we want to be internally? And that's where we talked about that earlier in that other lesson was, does our external desires match our internal desires? And to look at that from a scriptural perspective, and again, you know I'm going to go there, there is a theology out there that says, you know, rejoice in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And that has been taken to mean if you love the Lord, he'll give you everything you want. Well, when you don't get everything you want, what does that do to your internal belief system? See, what that scriptural actually means is when you rejoice in the Lord, he will place upon you the desires of your heart. Then your heart, your desires begin to line up with his. And we're going to see that more when we look at the internal outward approach. But I did want to touch on that right there because that's how these things get put together. We're putting together a puzzle here. Okay? But that's how desire can be positive and desire can be negative. Okay? But desire is wanting something, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You have to be the judge of that. And to judge that, you need to know what is that influence. Where is that influence coming from? Who said it? What is their life? And what's the motive behind that influence? Is that influence designed to create something in you that maybe doesn't line up with your internal identity? And again, we'll talk more about that later, but what is the source of that influence? Is it media telling you you need this new car, or you need this new cell phone, or you need this new gadget, or you need to sign up for this app, or you need to, you know, give away your freedoms for the greater good? What is the influence and what is the result of that influence? What's the motive behind it? And with that becomes our programming. Because as these external influences come in, they create a program within us. And that becomes what our belief system is. And we'll talk more about that as we step into the next system. Well, that's your limiting belief right there, but that also is a belief system. I'll give you a personal example here of a limiting belief. Sorry, I'm stepping ahead. Sorry, that's envy, desire, influence, and programming, which become part of our belief system. So let's step on to the next one. And let's talk about what a limiting belief is. And that is an unconscious, limiting belief is an unconscious decision that we make that keep us from reaching our full potential or enjoying a moment of hope or joy or happiness. It's an I can't versus a how can I. Or I would like to do that, but. Or I should be doing this. Anytime you see those key words, you've got a limiting belief in there. And those limiting beliefs come from various sources. And again, it can be positive or negative. Mostly a limiting belief is negative because it's keeping us from doing what our internal desire said we should be doing. Let me give you an example. When I was younger, in my 20s, early 20s, I was a theater major. Done a lot of theater, a lot of acting, a lot of public speaking, a lot of those types of things. And I was going to audition for a musical. Yeah, I know, that's funny, but anyway, don't tell anybody. When I stood up there for my audition and tried to do this song, I had an image pop in my head when I was 5 years old, when I was told I couldn't carry a tune in a bushel basket. That seed was a limiting belief. And it reared its ugly head while I was standing there doing my audition, and it was like somebody grabbed my throat and just squeezed. Sounded like somebody stepped on a cat. It was horrible. Okay? Very negative experience. But that is a limiting belief because I had an unconscious agreement with that statement. Was it true? You know, when I was 5 years old, it was probably true. Was it true when I was in my 20s? Probably not. So the question is, do you have a limiting belief like that, or you have a desire to accomplish something, but you're limited by something said that may or may not be true? It may be a skill you need to learn, but it doesn't have to be true. That's an example of a limiting belief and how it can affect you. It also affects the next layer, which is our identity and our ego. So our identity, or I'm going to call this our external identity, I'll explain that later, is built upon these two premises. And they're supported by the next two. So we are who we are because we've been told or influenced by others. Those are our identity created by external forces. Okay? And we've agreed to play, unconsciously agreed to play the role. Remember in the exercise, we identified ourselves by roles. And that's where our identity and our ego comes from, because we're attached to those roles, positive or negative. That's how those two relate, and that becomes who we are. Okay, so our next layer in there is the remembering, experiencing, and the purpose of time. How does time affect this? Okay, well, in my own personal example, I used the fact of something that happened in the past, remembering, affected something that happened in the present, because I was there at that moment. But the concept, the other part of that I didn't really mention, was the fact of when I was preparing for this audition, I was worried about it, which was a future event. So you've got the past, the present, and the future. So these define our perspective on events in our life. Now we go into more detail with that activity inside the program, but today, using my own simple illustration, how do you function? Are you the kind of person who takes pictures and you remember everything? You know, you take pictures of everything because you want to remember this, you want to remember that. Okay, and those are fine. Or do you simply want to, let's say, take an event and just have a good time at, say, a picnic, and you just want to enjoy the moment, okay, and just live in the moment and enjoy it and go from there? Or did you take pictures of the picnic? You know, and that's kind of a way to identify, are you a more remembering type person, or are you focused more on living in the moment? Well, what about the future? Are you more preparing for the future? Okay, and it's not necessarily that any is wrong, but when worry comes into the picture, does your experience based on the past have you worried about your future? You see what I'm saying? So you see how these past, present, and future actually come together and then define who we are, because of a belief system that may or may not be legitimate. You know, that event that happened when I was 5 affected my moment in the present, and it had me worried about it from the future event. So time plays a big part. And is there truth in it? Not really. Possibly when I was 5, yeah, I didn't know how to sing. I probably do know how to sing a little better now. I'll get back to you on that one. But those are things that we compromise within our belief system. And it's okay, but once you understand what's going on, then you can begin to have victory over that. Okay, so that's the remembering, experiencing, how time plays in this. And like I said, neither's necessarily correct, but again, they help define your perceptions and how you approach things. Remembering also functions as a point of negativity if there's been a bad experience in the past. But either way, a neural connection has been made from the memory to the present, which kind of can keep you from experiencing the now, which it did me when I did that audition. We've already covered that. Let's look at the next layer here with wiring. Now, wiring happens unconsciously. Now, these are fun. When we begin to observe ourselves, we get caught in the act. Okay? When we begin to see, like, maybe the smell of something, we create these limiting beliefs, you know, like I said, but it happens unconsciously. Psychologists will do that. You've probably seen word associations. If I say big, you say little. If I say red, you may think of a stop sign. They're just different word associations. Those are unconscious triggers. That's why in that exercise that we did prior to this, I wanted you not to think about things. I wanted you to kind of write things down quickly, because shows you those unconscious responses. Okay, and it becomes a powerful point of transformation, because when we realize that we're unconsciously wired for something, we can begin to consciously correct it. Okay, this is where we catch ourselves, as I did. We create a limiting belief in our children. This is tough, because just as my parent told me I couldn't carry a tune in a bushel basket, that created a trigger or limiting belief within me. So as a parent, my parental instinct is to keep my 12-year-old safe. Now, unconsciously, that can influence and create a negative or fear response. Okay, before we go into that. So if I'm bad about this, I'm always looking to be on the cautious side of things. Well, if you're always cautious, it's good to be cautious. But if you always look for that negative point, you're going to create programming, unconscious wiring. It's going to have him looking for the negative in everything. We do that as parents unconsciously. So how do we overcome that? Well, we've got to focus on the positive. Hey man, that's an awesome idea. But here's what you want to look for. And then there comes the but. There becomes that limiting belief. So as long as you're conscious of it, I think you can create a balance of that. You know, hey, let's go rock climbing. Okay, great. Let's not use any ropes. Maybe not such a good idea. Okay, so it's all not negative or positive, but it is identifying, is that negative thing or that limiting belief actually keeping you from doing something? Or are you identifying it and figuring out, how can I overcome this? See, that's the I can'ts versus the how can I's. That's that portion of it. So that's where our wiring and our unconscious automatic responses come from. We want to make sure that we're not creating a plethora of negative experiences. And you can probably look at yourself now, internalize a little bit. How many negative experiences do you have in relationships, you know, significant others, classes you've taken, maybe classes you failed, educational things, just negative experiences? Are they true? And we'll look more at those when we actually dig into detail inside here. Okay, let's move on. Mood, emotions, and NLP and programming. Now, I'm not going to cover NLP programming. I'm going to talk about it, but not get into it. Why? Because it's not something I choose to, but it is out there. But mood and emotions, they're automatic. You know, sometimes think about this. Think about great childhood memories. Maybe it's the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven when you come home from school. Can you relate to something like that? Can you relate maybe to the smell of sitting around a campfire when your family used to go camping in the mountains? See, I'm creating envy, desire, emotions, remembering and experiencing. See, that statement right there triggers all of those levels. And that can be in a negative or positive light. So our mood is affected by what I just said. Those chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven. You know, that cup of chocolate milk when you come in from playing in the snow or riding your sled. You know, those are great memories that trigger an emotional response. Okay, and see, and that's why I try not to get too emotional when I'm doing these things, because my emotion is going to trigger you. And I don't want to do that. I want you to understand your own emotions. So they become automatic. Now, how does that work in reverse? Let me give you an example to illustrate this. Be happy. What does it look like to be happy? Ever been happy before? You know, a lot of times you got this cheesy little grin on your face. You got that look. Your shoulders are back. You're upright. You're confident. You're happy. Now be sad. You know what it looks like when people are sad. Shoulders are down. They feel defeated. Breathing deep. They're sighing. You know, that's what it feels like to be sad or downtrodden or defeated. Pick your emotion. I'm using generalizations here. Now here's what I want you to do. You know, nobody's watching. Be happy. Now, feel sad. Externalize happy, but feel sad on the inside. You can't do it because your feeling, your emotion is attached to your physical. And that's where we get into that linguistic programming just a little bit. See, we can make a conscious effort to be happy. And that's where that fake it till you make it comes in. You know, but that's a process. We can say, that's not who I am, that's not what I believe, that's what I used to believe, but I'm going to make a new soundtrack, a new belief, and I'm going to overcome that. And that's actually, believe it or not, that's actually in Scripture. And we talk more about that when we get to our identity. But see, we can be masters of that. We can choose to walk around defeated and focus on every negative thing out there. Or we can choose to focus on the positive. Who do you want to be? So see, happiness boils down to a choice. Not saying we don't have challenges. Not saying we don't have slings and arrows and things coming against us. But we choose how we want to relate to it. You know, that's the key. And when you do create that happiness, you draw other people to you. Now, I'm not going to get into laws of attraction here. But that's the key. It's so much better to live a happy life in the face of adversity instead of just wallowing in your adversity continually. And I don't think people really want to be there, but that's a conscious choice, and this is how that choice is made, whether you believe it or not, whether you're conscious of it or not. External influences create a belief system who identify who you are so that you remember or experience ways unconsciously which control your mood and emotions and internally set up your identity. Internal identity. Well, it's just who I am. Sorry. You see that content, you see those layers that are created within you. Do you see your own personal layers? Does that make sense? So that's where that internal identity takes over. And I make a distinction between our external identity and internal. And you saw that when you did that example. Because when you described yourself, that was your external identity. That's how the world defines you. That's those first three layers. When you get down to your internal identity, after you made it, that's who you want to be. And most of the time, those two are in conflict. Who we want to be is not normally how we identify ourselves. Get it? Outside in, inside out. That's the approach we have to take. Who are we on the inside? And then we let that manifest to the outside. That's what we're going to describe in our next thing. So our internal identity focuses on our idealistic persona. who we want to be. Okay? And this is the short activity. We did that already. When I did this video, I had it in a different order. So I want you to understand those types of things. And as we get into our next video, I'm going to use a Venn diagram, which is concentric circles, to help explain inside out. Because our whole world is inside out, and Maslow's hierarchy is upside down. So that's where we're going next. Hope you enjoy this. Hope this is making you think, maybe rationalize, maybe giving you some aha moments, like I know it did me. And I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson. So with that, take care, God bless, and we will see you soon.